What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review the new movie Knock at the Cabin from director M. Night Shyamalan. And as everybody knows, he's all about those twist endings or third act revelations. So I will avoid spoilers initially, and I'll give you a warning if and when I go into any plot specific details. But let me just start with my overall thoughts. Very cool hook, very suspenseful first act. And then the movie gradually becomes increasingly idiotic as it progresses. And I'd say by the time you get to the end, it's as kind of moronic and kind of unintentionally funny as anything as Shyamalan has ever done, which almost makes it worse than a movie like The Happening, because initially I was emotionally invested in the story, but the follow-through and the execution of all of his ideas and where those ideas lead to, they all kind of feel like they were thrown together by a total amateur or just a well-intentioned teenager who spent like 5 whole minutes thinking up the end of the story. And for horror buffs or psychological thriller buffs or suspense buffs, I say the lack of any real violence on screen or horror on screen is going to leave fans of those genres unsatisfied. But if you're unfamiliar with the official premise, here's what they have written over on old Wikipedia. Knock at the Cabin is a 2023 American apocalyptic psychological horror film written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan, who wrote the screenplay from an initial draft by Steve Desmond and Michael Sherman. It is based on the 2018 novel The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul G. Tremblay, the first adaptation of one of his works. The film stars Dave Bautista, Jonathan Groff, I think it's Groff, Ben Aldridge, Nikki Amuka-Bird, Kristen Cui, Abby Quinn, and Rupert Grint. And as you've likely seen in the trailer, the film follows a same-sex couple that has adopted a little girl. They've rented out a cabin out in the woods when suddenly these 4 maniacs show up wielding weapons who claim that they are there to prevent the end of the world. And they are earnest and they are fervent in their beliefs and they are just all in. But it's unusual because they're not there to do anything horrible or dangerous. They're there to convince this family that they have to make this ultimate sacrifice. And it's all about trying to almost like, through using very soft and soothing language and talking about how much empathy they feel and how open-minded they are, that they are going to try and persuade this family into coming to the right decision. Meanwhile, the implicit threat of violence is there all the time. But I guess the easiest way to discuss this is just to break it down into the good and the bad and the atrocious. So the good, the little girl's absolutely precious. I say the best scene of the movie is the opening where she's out collecting grasshoppers, putting them in a jar, and Dave Bautista emerges from the woods and just starts talking to her. And it's cool seeing Dave switch gears. I mean, he's like in his mid-50s now, and even though he's still like bricked up and just got muscles unstacked on muscles. I mean, he is like carved out of stone, but I think he recognizes his days of being Drax or playing, similar characters are drawing to a close. So he's trying to pivot, and yeah, he's pretty goddamn good in this. And Jonathan Groff, once again, I'm sorry, I don't know the correct pronunciation of his last name. I first saw him in season 1 of Mindhunter, which was a really cool season of television. I think his character there was just a more interesting character and better written, so he was much stronger in that show, but very talented actor. He was totally fine in this. The person who stole the show in this was Ben Aldridge, and he seems like the only person in this movie with any real intelligence or cynicism or he's got a bit of an edge to him, and he's let's just say disinclined to believe anybody's their predictions about doom and gloom and the apocalypse just at face value. He's a lawyer and he likes evidence and he likes proof, but for a movie that's very vague on details, often frustratingly so, his character is, every time he speaks, that's when the movie actually feels like it's kind of sort of coming together. Because if, like me, you're getting frustrated with the movie as it progresses, he at least is there to call bullshit on everything that's happening in the flick. What else was good? It was slickly shot. It has a good visual style. I mean, at this point, M. Night Shyamalan, he's been making movies for 30 years, and one would hope that he has learned a thing or two about how to frame a shot, how to move the camera, how to light the scene, so on and so forth. And his cinematographer, I had 2, Yaron Blaschke and Lowell A. Meyer. They did a damn good job. But that's about it as far as the good is concerned. Once again, just the premise, it is an interesting hook where people show up to your home threatening violence, claiming they're there to save the world, and forcing you to make a horrible decision. And then the movie slowly but surely starts to show these troubling signs or warning signs that the filmmakers are just not going to be able to stick the landing. So let's get into the aspects of the movie that I was less impressed by. The violence. This is a movie that's pretending to be a violent movie or a suspenseful movie, but it really isn't. I was honestly shocked and amazed when I realized that the Motion Picture Association slapped an R rating on this movie. It just shows how useless and misguided and just fundamentally flawed how that entire institution has become. And I think it just needs to be completely dismantled and done away with. Movies should either be for kids or unrated, and that's all we really need. But I thought this movie was going to be like PG. I mean, the violence, it's all suggested or implied off screen. You see nothing. I mean, you might see a few drops of blood here and there, but it is positively kid-friendly. And so it's a weird thing where Shyamalan, he doesn't actually like to make thrillers or horror movies. He likes to make Shyamalan movies. And the Shyamalan flavor or style is very specific. And if in the past you've been frustrated by his approach to those genres, you're going to be frustrated by this. However, I will say it's not as bad as his worst movies. I mean, if you look at his filmography, I'd say his worst movies, right around like 2008 to 2013, I felt like he was really just hitting the skids, and his whole career was coming unraveled where, after Sixth Sense and Unbreakable and Signs, irrespective of what you think of those movies, I think less and less as time goes by. But they made a lot of fucking money, and so he was going to get a lot of turns at bat making mistakes before anybody told him, you know what, maybe we ought to rein you in a little bit. But The Happening was just idiotic, and After Earth is a strong contender for the worst movie made by Hollywood in the 21st century. And it is fucking pathetic. But anyway, I digress. But if you are someone like me where you often find yourself kind of rolling your eyes and just like wanting to put a gun in your mouth, like, why am I spending money to subject myself to this idiotic experience? You will have those same emotions about maybe a third or halfway through this movie, and then increasingly so as the movie progresses. And some people might justifiably ask, if you dislike his movies so much, why subject yourself to the M. Night Shyamalan experience? And my answer would be, I've got a YouTube channel devoted to film and television, and right now, apart from The Last of Us, it is slim pickings. But also, his career is fascinating. He's been making movies for 30 years, and this is a guy who's been able to make movies his way for a long time, which is kind of the dream of every filmmaker. So I find his career trajectory fascinating, even if he very rarely makes a movie that I enjoy. But if you go back and watch some of my old reviews for some of his other flicks, in 2019, when I reviewed Glass, I was actually excited at that point for what I was describing at that point to be like the big comeback of M. Night Shyamalan, because I felt like Split and Glass were showing a major career turnaround. And then I started watching Servant, and I was like, ugh, like, oh yeah, he's just as bad as he always was. And I skipped Old outright because everyone that I talked to who saw it said that it was as bad as anything as he's ever done. But I've seen all the rest of his movies. Anyway, getting back to Knock at the Cabin. So I think my chief complaint about this movie comes in the form of the lore or the backdrop that's informing this apocalyptic narrative, because it's going for a very broad, non-denominational kind of prediction of the apocalypse that you could almost kind of cut and paste it into a variety of faiths, and they did that very specifically. But when you watch a movie like The Omen, or you watch a movie like The Exorcist, they're very specific in the religion that they're approaching, and depending upon your background or how you were raised, those movies are going to hit you in different ways. I no longer practice a religion, but I was raised Episcopalian, so when I see very like Christian-specific horror movies like Rosemary's Baby, I'm like, woohoo! And they really get me just because I'm familiar with the lore, so to speak. But this is a weird movie where they chose to avoid any official religion of any kind. So maybe it'll work for people who are just inherently just superstitious. Like, as we used to say in North Carolina, some people are just afraid of the thunder, which means they don't walk under ladders, or they're afraid of black cats, or whatever the case might be. They have a lot of superstitions or a lot of beliefs that you cannot, steer them away from, or the kind of people who say, I'm not very religious, but I'm really spiritual. Those are the kind of people who might respond to this very broad general approach to religion. But this approach might have worked if they had found a way to go into some more specifics. Because the actors keep talking about how it's been foretold that this must happen, or humanity has been judged, and the implication is that some sort of divine figure, whether that's a god or whatever, is the one who's sitting in judgment of humanity. But they never specify, and I guess I am getting kind of into vaguely spoiler territory, so I won't be able to make my point without some specificity, so bail out now if that annoys you. But if they went the full Christian route, they could just say, God has judged you, or Jesus has judged you, whatever the case might be, and gone full, what the hell's the last Book of Revelations, and employed some of those details and those signs. Because at one point they do reference the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which definitely comes from the Book of Revelations, but it almost feels like they're doing so in like the broadest, least specific way imaginable, because I feel like everybody understands the idea of the 4 horsemen, irrespective of what their religious background might be. But as these characters keep talking about the visions that they've had and like the beliefs of what will come to be if this family does not make a personal sacrifice of one of their family members, and things start happening in the outside world, like tsunamis and plagues and planes falling out of the sky, etc., I found myself increasingly frustrated that they never actually said who is sitting in judgment of humanity. And it's when the world starts to completely fall to pieces that I found myself having to almost kind of repress a laugh at the movie's expense, because there's these scenes with planes falling out of the sky where I was like, well, even if a plane's engines were to suddenly shut off, they still have wings. Like, they can glide a bit. And so they just kind of start falling out of the sky as if they had no forward momentum prior to when they started falling. And so if you have any sort of skepticism at all, you're immediately just going to throw up your hands and say, I call bullshit. This movie's falling to pieces. And as far as the villains are concerned, even though I like how Dave Bautista's trying to switch gears, they're not very scary. They seem more petrified themselves, and they're kind of like those emotional hemophiliacs who are overly sensitive about a variety of things, where I found them pretty goddamn lame. Like, Rupert Grint should tell M. Night Shyamalan to lose his phone number, because he's one of the reasons that I stopped watching that show, The Servant, or just Servant. And I just thought that he was his character was so annoying in the first few episodes. He's one of the reasons why I turned it off. And yeah, Rupert Grint, he's a talented, he's not so young anymore, but a talented young actor, and I feel like he's got some chops, but he is horrendous in this movie. And it just, like, imagine being taken hostage by the most like non-judgmental, sensitive, inclusive people that you've ever met. And they're constantly talking about empathy and acceptance. And it made me feel like I was like being like taken hostage by like Twitter as a community. Anyway, it was torturous being exposed to their characters, not because they're scary, but just because they're really annoying characters. So I guess the most lingering question that I'm left with is not how dumb the ending is, and it is pretty goddamn dumb, but why am I so dumb where I keep paying money for this experience? Because it should come as no surprise to anybody that his movies can be frustrating in the last act. I mean, a perfect example would be The Village. And I know a lot of people like to defend The Village. I think The Village completely falls to pieces at the end. And it's the first real ominous sign of how M. Night Shyamalan, like the Emperor is wearing no clothes. Like, when he bursts onto the scene, I mean, he'd already made 2 movies, but when he directed The Sixth Sense, and it came out in 1999, monster hit, and everybody was convinced, oh, we're looking at the birth of a new Spielberg or a new Hitchcock or a new just fantastic entertainer who will be a household name. And I feel like he kind of became a household name, but not because he's a great filmmaker, but because I guess the initial promise that was suggested by The Sixth Sense, this great career that so many people were anticipating and predicting, it never came true. And I can remember reading a really annoying interview with him after The Sixth Sense, where he was saying how after his first 2 movies underperformed, his response was by writing one of the best screenplays ever made. I'm like, you know what? Let other people say that. You don't get to say that. You make the movie, other people can judge. And I think The Sixth Sense, as entertaining as it was, and it did make me scream out loud at one point during the movie, when you revisit it, the whole thing falls to pieces. Like, the narrative logic isn't consistent throughout the film. And I feel like you can make up whatever rules you like for a movie, but then you have to be true to the story that you're telling And the whole thing is, in that movie, Bruce Willis is a ghost who doesn't realize he's a ghost. Spoiler alert. But they keep bumping into ghosts who don't realize that they're a ghost. Like, they see a bunch of people hanging at one point on nooses in this courthouse that used to be a place where they would execute people or hang people. And it's like, well, if they don't know that they're ghosts, they wouldn't just sit there like, man, like, how come I never get down? Like, narratively, the logic isn't consistent throughout the film. And then Unbreakable, I know a lot of people love that movie and think it's like the best unofficial Superman movie ever made. I think Unbreakable is just one of the dumbest fucking movies I've ever seen, and I broke ranks with everybody on that, including Quentin Tarantino, who loves Unbreakable. And by the time we got to Signs, it had a few moments, but ultimately I was pretty disappointed. But yeah, don't get me started on Lady in the Water or The Last Airbender. I mean, those are some of the worst movies ever made. I thought The Visit was dreadful. I have a lot of friends who defend it. I thought it was a movie made by a moron for morons, and I just fucking hated it. But here's the thing. I mean, I know a lot about his career, so he must be doing something right, where I find myself constantly watching his flicks. Or maybe it's just because I have a podcast about movies and a YouTube channel devoted to movies. And M. Night Shyamalan, I mean, he's a filmmaker who will always be worthy of discussion just because we can analyze the ups and downs and the peaks and valleys of his career. But it's funny how, like, with Glass, how I predicted a major comeback at that point, but it seems like I was very much in the minority on Glass too. So I was in the minority on Unbreakable, and I was in the minority on Glass. But at this point, everybody is free to make up their own minds. He's making piles of money, making movies his way. I'm sure our criticisms or our reservations about some of his movies, I'm sure he loses zero sleep about any of it because he's been getting away with it for so long. He's not about to change or improve or have like a major new direction in his career at this point. So if you're asking yourself, is it worth it to drive to a theater and throw down cash and see this flick? I would say no, unless you just love his movies and can't bear the idea of missing any of them. But I feel like as much as I want to see the movie business back at full speed, back at full strength, I want to see ticket sales double what they currently are. But if the movies aren't strong enough to justify that level of loyalty, let the movie business just completely disintegrate and die on the vine. It'll break my heart because I'm a movie freak, but in the end, the movie business is only as strong as the filmmakers who are choosing to use that medium, and it's only as strong as the final product. And I don't think that Knock at the Cabin is remotely strong enough for people to go out of their way and devote a few hours of their life or 20 or 30 bucks to getting this experience. But before I turn off the microphone, I do have to share some breaking news because Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel, they now sell beard products. That's right, they're once again revolutionizing men's grooming with the brand new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. From a beard trim to a fresh shave, the technology behind the Beard Hedger Pro Kit allows you to shape your signature beard look. Now you can finally use Manscaped products to make your drapes match your carpet by going to manscaped.com and using the discount code WRONGREEL in all caps for 20% off and free shipping. Join the 7 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and check out the Performance Package 4.0. Inside the Performance Package 4.0, you'll find the Signature Lawnmower 4.0. The advanced skin-safe technology reduces cuts and nicks on your delicate parts. It also comes equipped with the 4000K LED spotlight that will shine a light to the promised land that this year is looking to be. And a grooming routine will never be complete without also applying Crop Preserver and Crop Reviver before showing off your brand new, freshly shorn buck-ass naked self. These unique formulations take care of the smelliest part of your body and are a big boost to your confidence in 2023. And to complete the set, Manscaped includes their Shed Travel Bag and Anti-Chafing Boxer Briefs as free gifts to keep all your goodies stored comfortably. So if you like my podcast, Wrong Reel, or you like this channel, consider making a purchase. That is very helpful to my commentary endeavors. Or if you don't want to do that, at a minimum, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. I would really appreciate it. But hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out if you want to tell me how wrong I was in my assessment of this flick. But can't thank you enough for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.